Usability testing is one of the most straightforward and mature forms of discovery testing that has existed for many years. And the tools are better and the teams know much more about this than they used to. And the main difference today from the past is that we do usability testing in discovery, using prototypes before we build the product and not at the end, where it's really too late to correct the issues without significant rework or waste. And when running usability sessions, typically you might be a company large enough to have your own user research group, in which case, by all means, secure as much time as you can from your research team, who can be a great help to you. And secondly, you may have funds earmarked for outside services, and so you may be able to go to user research firms to conduct the testing for you. But at the price that most of these firms charge, the chances are that you won't be able to afford nearly as much of this type of testing as your product will need. And so it's most likely that you would need to do some of this testing yourself. No, you won't be as proficient as a trained researcher, but you'll find that with a little practice, you can still identify the serious issues and friction points with your product, which is what is important. So let's look at how we can conduct usability testing. Firstly, we need to recruit users to test. And if you've got a research group, they can help you with this. But if you don't, you've got several options. You can firstly advertise for test subjects on classified sites like Craigslist, or you can set up an SEM campaign using Google AdWords to recruit users, which is especially good if you're looking for users that are in the moment of trying out a product like yours. Now, if you have a list of email addresses of your users, you can also do a selection from there. Or you could solicit volunteers on your website. Lots of major companies do this today. And remember that you can still call and screen the volunteers to make sure that the people you select are in your target market. And then you can go to where users congregate, to places like trade shows, shopping centers for e-commerce sites, or sports bars for fantasy sports. Look for where your users congregate and go find them there. And if your product is addressing a real need, you usually won't have trouble getting people to give you an hour, assuming, of course, you're giving them something in return. And if you're asking them to come to your location, you will likely have to compensate them for their time. And optionally, you can arrange to meet them at a mutually convenient location, such as a coffee shop. And this is such a common practice that it's often referred to as Starbucks testing. Now, let's look at how we prepare for the test. Usually, for usability purposes, we can use a medium or high fidelity user prototype. And when we do this kind of usability test, it's with the product manager, the product designer, and one of the engineers from the team. And often the magic happens when an engineer is present. So I always try to encourage engineers to attend whenever possible. And if you have a user researcher, they might actually help to administer the test. But the product manager and designer must absolutely always be present for the tests. And you need to define in advance the set of tasks that you want them to test. Usually they are fairly obvious. For example, if you are building an alarm clock app for a mobile device, your users will need to do things like set an alarm, find and hit the snooze button, and so on. And they may be more obscure tasks, but concentrate on the primary ones, the ones that the users will have to do most of the time. And remember that you need to overcome any bias that you have. And to do this, we can train ourselves on how to conduct ourselves during the actual testing. And we also can make sure that the testing happens early before we fall too much in love with our own ideas. And good product managers know that they will get the product wrong initially and that nobody gets it right the first time. And that the learning loop allows them to test and iterate to find the fastest path to a successful product. And in terms of actually running the testing, have one person administer the usability test and another person take notes. And this will help to take some of the load off and make sure that nothing is missed. And you can use formal testing labs if you need to. And they typically have a setup with a two-way mirror or a closed circuit video monitor with cameras that capture both the screen and the user from the front. This is fine if you have it, but it's almost as valuable to test prototypes at a tiny table at a coffee shop. And sometimes this is preferable to the testing lab because the user feels a lot less like a lab rat. And the other environment that works well is your customer's office. And it can be time consuming to do, but it could be very useful to you because the customer is the master of their own domain and they would be much more comfortable and talkative there. And additionally, all the cues are there to remind them of how they might use the product. And you can learn a lot just by observing their environment. how big is their monitor, how fast is their computer and network connection, how do they communicate with their colleagues on their work tasks. So once we've recruited our users, let's talk about how to test your prototype. When you first start the actual usability test, make sure to tell your subject that this is just a prototype, it's a very early product idea and it's not real. Explain that your feelings won't be hurt by candid feedback, good or bad, and that you're testing the prototype and not testing them. Only the prototype can pass or fail. And one more thing you can do before they jump into the task is to see if they can tell from the landing page of your prototype what it is that you do. Try to gauge their initial impression. Remember that you'll lose that first time visitor context once they jump into the task, so don't miss that opportunity. And you'll find that that landing page and that initial experience is an incredibly important opportunity to bridge the gap between expectations of what the product does and what it actually does. And when testing, you really want to do everything you can to keep the user in use mode and not in critique mode. What matters is whether users can easily do the task they need to do. It really doesn't matter if the user thinks something on the page is ugly or should be moved or changed. And so some misguided testers might ask questions like, what 3 things on this page would you change? Or what don't you like on this page? And that's not how you conduct usability tests. So it's much more important to watch what they do than to watch what they say. And during the testing, a main skill that you have to learn is to keep quiet. When you see someone struggling, most of us have a natural urge to help the person out, but as a tester, you need to suppress that urge. It's your job to become a really horrible conversationalist. Get comfortable with silence because as a usability researcher, silence is your friend. And there are really 3 important cases you're looking for. Firstly, the user got through the task with no problem at all and no help, or the user struggled and complained a bit, but they eventually got through it, or they got so frustrated that they gave up. And sometimes people might give up quickly, so you may need to encourage them to keep trying a bit longer. But if you got to the point where you truly believe that they would leave the product, then you can note that they gave up. And another suggestion, if you don't like silence, is to act like a parrot. So you can observe what they're doing and say things like, I see that you are looking at the list on the right, and this will prompt them to tell you what they're trying to do or what they're looking for. And if they ask a question, maybe rather than giving a leading answer, you can play the question back to them, and this will get them thinking further. And fundamentally, you're trying to get an understanding of how your target user thinks about the problem, to identify places in your prototype where your software presentation is inconsistent with how they think about the problem. That's what it means to be counterintuitive. And you also should pay attention to the body language of the subject. It's often painfully obvious when they don't like something, so pay attention to the body language. And once you've gained insight, what do? Well, there's no law saying that you have to keep the tests identical for all your subjects. You can, in fact, update the prototype as you learn new things. And so your first subject might have one prototype, and then the second subject might have a slightly improved version of that prototype. And so there is no reason at all to try to offer all of the subjects the same prototype. Our goal is not to prove anything here. Statistically, what we're trying to do is learn as quickly as we can and iterate and improve upon the prototype. So after each test subject, usually the product manager or the designer writes up a short summary of the key learnings and sends it to the product team. And forget the big report because this will take too long. And the product team would then update the prototype and return it, and that new prototype could then be used to test the next subject. All right, so that is a summary of testing usability. In the next lesson, we will look at how to go about testing value. See you soon.